Hello, good afternoon. More than 20 former footballers have contacted a special helpline set up by the Professional Footballers Association since former player Andy Woodward went public with sexual abuse allegations. The claims concern Barry Bennell, a coach and convicted paedophile. Today, the Football Association announced it's appointed a top barrister to help with an internal review. Katie Gorno reports.
It's a scandal that's growing by the day as more players come forward to tell their stories of the abuse they suffered as children.
Last week I was on here, I was on my own, and I was so scared.
Andy Woodward was the first to speak out last week. Now another former Crewe player, Anthony Hughes, has broken his silence. He revealed to the Sunday Mirror that he too was abused at the hands of the club's youth coach Barry Bennell, now a convicted paedophile. It's prompted further concerns of the scale of historical abuse allegations in football. This morning, the Professional Players Association said more than 20 of its members have been in contact regarding allegations. On Wednesday, that figure was 11.
We need to put all these youngsters in a better place. That's the least the game can do with the resources we've got to make up for the lack of the duty of care that was shown at the time.
Woodward met with FA officials to discuss the scandal earlier this week, and today the FA has confirmed it will investigate and has appointed a senior lawyer to assist with its review. In a statement, they said they will look into what information the FA was aware of, what clubs were aware of, and what action was or should have been taken. They'll make recommendations in order to seek to ensure these situations can never be repeated. The FA's move has been welcomed by Ian Ackley, who was abused by Bennell as a young player and helped to put him in jail in 1998.
To this day, I haven't spoken to anybody officially from any organisation, club, governing body, charity or otherwise. It's 33 years since the abuse stopped, and I've had to live with this. Some recognition would have been nice.
As thousands of children around the country lace up their boots this afternoon, football is coming to terms with a horrifying scandal. Who knew what and when are now key questions for the sport to answer.
And Katie joins me in the studio now. Katie, and while there's been a lot of welcomes for this FA initiative, some people think the FA were pretty slow off the mark.
Well, that's right. Some of the victims that I've spoken to have criticised the football authorities for not being on the front foot with this and not being more proactive. We heard from Ian Ackley in the report there. Now, he spoke out about Barry Bennell, the coach at the centre of the scandal with those links to Crewe Alexandra and Manchester City. He spoke out about him in the 90s and helped to jail him in 98 for 9 years. But the FA didn't launch an investigation then. They didn't look into what lessons could have been learned. Now, it's taken former victims of Bennell to come out more recently to shine a fresh light on this abuse. But the FA do say that they are working closely with the police. They don't want to do anything that could interfere with the criminal process. They supported the setting up of a 24-hour hotline with the NSPCC that has received over 100 calls. But the scandal of all this is escalating. There are 4 police forces at the moment investigating these historical abuse allegations, and concerns as well that this scandal could stretch into other sports too.
Katie, thanks very much. Now, flags are flying at half-mast on government buildings across Cuba, where 9 days of national mourning have begun for the former leader Fidel Castro. Weddings and public events have been cancelled following the death of the man who led the country's communist revolution more than half a century ago. Our correspondent Will Grant is in Havana and Gary O'Donoghue in Miami. They've sent these reports.
It is hard to overstate exactly how important Fidel Castro was to Cubans. Whether he was their beloved revolutionary hero and liberator, or if they saw him as a despot and tyrant, the name Castro has been an intrinsic part of their lives for decades. So adapting to the news that the 90-year-old Fidel Castro, latterly more likely to be seen in tracksuits than olive green fatigues, was gone has been difficult to digest for some. A group of students appeared outside the law faculty he studied in the 1950s, carrying Cuban flags, pictures of Fidel, and holding up revolutionary slogans. Many were in tears, genuinely moved by the loss of a man they consider to have freed their country from Washington's grasp. Elsewhere in Havana, people were more muted, perhaps a little quieter and more reflective as they sought out the state-run newspaper or paid for a little internet access. By next week, they will begin to file past the urn of Castro's ashes before it is taken to Santiago in eastern Cuba and laid to rest there. Will Grant, BBC News, Havana.
Just 90 miles away in Miami, a very different picture. Generations of Cuban exiles have hoped for this moment, fervently believing that their dream of a free Cuba has now got a step closer.
This is a dictator that has hurt the lives of at least 4 generations of Cubans, inside and outside the island. There are families that have been divided. There are people who have relatives that has been shot, people whose relatives have been in jail for many years. So most of the wounds have not healed yet.
The president-elect, Donald Trump, did not mince his words over Fidel Castro's death. In a statement, he called him a brutal dictator. Though in a sign that he may be open to talking, he said, "Our administration will do all it can to ensure the Cuban people can finally begin their journey toward prosperity and liberty." This is a moment which Miami's Cuban community will not forget, but many will expect the new president, Donald Trump, to take a hard line with Cuba's current leader, Raul Castro. And some want the talking to continue.
Start the dialogue again with the Cuban government. But this time, no concessions. They have to give something for us in order for us to give something to them.
He should completely dismantle the Cuban regime, completely, before we actually do any business putting any U.S. tax dollars into that country.
Oh boy. I don't think he should do anything. I think what President Obama did was fine, and just leave things as is.
They may be in mourning in Havana, but here in Miami, Cuban exiles are still celebrating the passing of a man they call a tyrant. But after the partying is over, the big questions remain. For example, will Donald Trump continue to relax restrictions? Will Congress let him? And will Raul Castro begin any kind of process of political reform? Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Miami, Florida.
Here, the UK Equalities Watchdog has written to every political party leader at Westminster to urge them to tone down campaigning, which it believes has polarised the country in the wake of the Brexit vote. The letter from the Equality and Human Rights Commission expresses concern about racist, anti-Semitic and homophobic attacks since the vote to leave the EU in June, and it urges the government to do more to tackle hate crime. 200 people have been forced to leave their homes in the Italian region of Genoa after a landslide. Heavy rains caused part of the surrounding area to collapse, threatening some buildings. In the ski resort of Manesi, cracks have opened up in the roads and part of the village of Arezzo is covered in mud. Syrian government forces have captured a key district in eastern Aleppo, which has been controlled by rebel forces for the past 4 years. More than 250,000 people are thought to be trapped in besieged areas of the city. Our diplomatic correspondent Caroline Hawley is with me now. How significant is this, do you think, Caroline?
Well, I think it is important because it's the first time that government forces have taken the Hanano district, which is the first district that rebels took back in 2012. It's part, of course, of a major government offensive to retake the whole of Aleppo, which was once the economic capital of the country, so very important to both sides. The rebel-held East has been relentlessly bombarded by government forces over the past couple of weeks, and there are now reports that hundreds of civilians have fled to government-controlled areas, and this is the first time this has really happened, and I think it is a measure of just how desperate things have become in the rebel-held East. Meanwhile, after capturing that district, government forces are pressing on with their campaign, and they're fighting for an area which, if they take, will cut the rebel-held East in two, and that clearly would be a major blow for the rebels.
Caroline, thanks very much. And you can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel. The next news on BBC One is at 5 to 6.